Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and today we are going to deal with a subject we haven't dealt with in a while, have we, Randall? Fine art. And in particular, for the next couple of episodes, we're going to be dealing, right, with fine art.
Yes, we're going to
So
do a deep
these
dive.
episodes are, you can listen to the next one or two, maybe even three episodes sequential. You should want to listen to them sequentially because they're all kind of working together out of they're all something in common. We're dealing with 19th century art, 20th century art. We're dealing with a lot of fascinating people. Unfortunately, you cannot take this episode for college credit, though at moments you may feel like that's exactly what this is. Before we start, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. Randall, what's a great way to reach us?
Check our website out, chrisandrandall.com. And you can check out our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall. A lot of people like to post comments there.
Yeah, we like to hear what you have to say. This is certainly one of our more freestyle, crazy episodes. So I'd like to know if these are the kinds of things you'd like to see more of or less of. All right, Randall, take us away.
Well, okay, so I started this show because, I had a different conception about this show before we went in. It's actually, we wanted to examine fine art. I wanted to examine fine art actually in the context of Hitler, which is going to be like a few shows out now. But I had to go way back because I wanted to see what led up to modern art. And in my research, I've discovered that there is and we already talked about this a little bit, Chris, before the show. There is in art an abstract moment. It's a moment where, abstract art starts, and it's sort of like the gateway to modern art. It's the gateway to the modern art universe, and it's not. And before I started researching this, I thought, and I just want you to know, I just want the audience to know that all my opinions on this are going to be quite unorthodox, probably, and Chris is going to come up with the orthodox opinion, and so don't listen to me if you want to get college credit.
But I will represent orthodoxy.
All right, but I guess the orthodox opinion is the opinion I went into this research with, is that the abstract moment starts around 1900. That's when abstract art really is invented, shall we say. But before then, the orthodox opinion is that there's a transition. They're leading up to it. Artists are leading up to it. Okay, so you're starting with the Impressionists, especially, where they're breaking from the bounds of realism and they're moving towards abstraction. But in my research, I got to say, I found that I don't think that's the case. And I want to start here. Let me do a screen share. I want to start with. Can you see this painting, Chris?
I can indeed.
I want to start.
And now I just want to say, for those of you listening on the podcast, as we are dealing with visual art, and you're going, well, what's going on? Two things. First off, I will always ask Randall to describe what we're looking at, what we're seeing. But also, if you do go to our website, right, we will have a slideshow.
Yeah, I'll put these slides together so that you can just download them and look at them if you want.
Okay, so everything is in sequence. So when you go to our website, and again, what is the URL for that?
chrisandrandall.com.
You will find what will be the title of the slideshow?
Well, I don't know, but I'll put them in a zip file. It'll just be a bunch of JPEGs or whatever. And
but the zip file will be titled for this show?
Sure. I mean, you'll see it. It'll be a link to it.
It'll say something like, what, art for this episode or something?
Sure, slideshow for this episode, sure.
All right, so it will be easy to follow. Now, since you're right now listening and you cannot see it, Randall, can you just give me a basic description of what we're looking at?
Well, let me get there. So
okay.
So I want to start in the year 1760. Okay, now why am I starting 1760? Because there's an exhibition of art held in the Great Room of the Society of Arts. It's organized by a body called the Free Society, and one of the major figures in this exhibition is Alexander Cozens, and he's a landscape painter. And the thing about the landscape painters that I discovered is the landscape painters are pretty much most art. Okay, let's go back even before then, because most art, it seems like, is figurative. Almost all art is figurative. I mean, you go back to like cave paintings, Chris, and you're seeing figurative art. You're seeing
art that replicates life.
Right. Going all the way back to cave paintings. Yeah, they're trying to paint things that actually exist. Okay,
things that are seen and perceived.
Right. Things in our universe.
Yeah. The known world that we can see.
Right. And it's funny because when you look at art through history, you continually see this. Like, for instance, you look at the Roman Empire. They're decorating their houses with these mosaics of figures, right? The mosaics are figures of people doing things and being people. I mean, they represent things in the real world. The ancient Egyptians, they're creating figures. It's all figurative art.
I do want to just interrupt you very briefly, because other people will be saying, Chris, Randall, what about gods and spirits? Even that is the case. Gods and spirits, religious works, symbolism, angels, demons, whatever, are still figurative and are still based on human anatomy, animal anatomy. They are at least somehow rooted in a known universe, even if they are a departure from reality.
Right. And, something else I was thinking about that, it's very interesting. This is something I thought about as a kid. Like, why is it in ancient mythological stories and art, you always have creatures that have like the head of a lion and the wings of an eagle and the tail of a snake, and you know what I mean? It's like always they're making fantasy creatures from parts of other creatures. Why are they not making fantasy creatures that are completely fantastic, right? That have no basis in our reality? They aren't, right? They're creating their fantasies. They're creating their fictional creatures from parts of creatures that already exist, and you see that all through history. And there's no. It seems like there's no conceptual ability for them to create something that's completely fantastical. Okay, and you see that all through history. And when you get to like around 1760, you get to let's say the 1700s. You're getting okay. Let's get to painting, right? So in Europe, in medieval, pre-modern Europe, you have like a very sophisticated system of portrait painting. You have all these portrait painters going around. Landscape painters, all these painters going around, they're basically creating near photorealistic works of what they see around them for rich people. Even the church, you brought up the church, how the church is, when the church is depicting gods and angels and things, they look like us, don't they, Chris?
Well,
they're not having Michelangelo.
Like us, or they look like cats. Or wolves or whatever. They're rooted in something that comes from the known world.
Right. I mean, look at Michelangelo.
There's a natural anatomy to the Sphinx, right? Even though nothing looks like a Sphinx, what is a Sphinx? It's the body of a...
It's a body of a lion, I think, and the head of a cat, maybe.
Head of a cat. So, if you can draw those two objects and combine them, you have a mythological being.
Actually, the Sphinx might just be a big cat. But
a Pegasus.
Yeah,
no,
so
a
Pegasus, is a minotaur, right? They have different body parts from different animals. So you see that all throughout. So yeah, the church, when they commission Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel, he's not painting God is like some kind of abstract image. He's painting God as a man.
Right.
Okay, so you get to around the 1700s, and you have a very sophisticated economy, shall we say, of painters going around painting for rich people and other commissions, and you have these painters, these landscape painters, who are and the interesting thing I find about landscape painters is they're generally doing what all the other painters are doing, but some of these landscape painters are taking great liberties when they paint the skies. And so, are you familiar with Alexander Cozens or his son?
No, actually, I'm not. This is fascinating.
John Robert Cozens. Okay, so Alexander Cozens, he painted and he taught painting. And the thing that's interesting is these landscape painters, some of them just wanted to paint the sky as they saw it, as it really was.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the landscape painters took, like I said, they took great liberties to paint, like, shall we say, an abstract sky.
Mm-hmm.
But they almost didn't. But see, it's like, this is the interesting thing I find conceptually about it. Even though they are starting to paint something conceptual, something abstract, it's almost like they don't realize it. And they don't break out of the, you know what I'm saying, Chris? They don't break out of the bounds of conceptual art or of representational art yet. Like,
okay.
let me read you something about Cozens. So this is one of Cozens' students said this about Cozens' teaching method. This is Alexander Cozens, the father of John Robert Cozens. So Cozens says, and John Robert became a painter too, landscape painter. Cozens dashed out upon several pieces of paper a series of accidental smudges and blots in black, brown, and gray, which, being floated on, he impressed again upon other paper, and by the exercise of his fertile imagination and a certain degree of ingenious coaxing, converted into romantic rocks, woods, towers, steeples, cottages, rivers, fields, and waterfalls. Blue and gray blots formed the mountains, clouds, and skies. An improvement on this plan was to splash the bottoms of earthenware plates with these blots and to stamp impressions therefrom on sheets of damped paper.
That is so interesting because it's not, to me, that almost seems like 100 years into the future.
Right. Now look, now do you see the first slide? That's
okay. So for those of you who are just listening, we're looking at black and white. I think it's at pencil and chalk.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay, like what I believe to be pencil and chalk of two tigers, one sleeping, and then in the foreground behind it is a smaller part of a tiger roaring. Though not so, and everything is just in gray and black. And then most of the background that is not the two tigers is just white.
Right. So,
but I'm not doing it justice because in your mind's eye, if you're listening, you're thinking in color, you're thinking in detail, whereas here the brushwork or the pen work is more. If you've ever seen a comic book, especially a black and white comic book, it looks much more like an illustration than a picture depiction.
Right. So you can see that this quick painting started as a couple of ink blots that were made by Cozens randomly. And then he looked at it and said, oh, I'm going to make these two ink blots into two tigers.
Okay, and if you've ever taken just the base class in drawing, which starts with circles and squares, and then you draw figures, I can easily see how you could go from some ink blots to making them into tigers. And because they're slightly rounded and amorphous in shape, I definitely see the gestalt of it being both where it comes from and what it looks like.
Okay, now my point with this, though, is you see how Cozens, he's purposefully making something that's abstract into something that's not abstract. Okay, it's almost like the concept that something would be abstract, it's not art, right? It's impossible to be art. So Cozens is taking something that can't possibly be art and turning it into art.
Now, just be very clear, folks. In this period in the 18th century, that is the case. You know, we're so used to 20th and 21st century, even 19th century. But at this period of history, art is primarily just representational. Everything must reflect something specific.
Well, everything's
So that's
representational.
that's a big note you've just kind of dropped on us, Randall.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate it, Chris. Yeah. So you see my point, though, right?
Yeah,
It's like the whole
stunning.
concept that something could be abstract. It's completely alien and beyond them. In 1785, Cozens published a pamphlet about drawing landscapes from ink blots called "A New Method of Assisting the Invention of Drawing Original Compositions of Landscape." He got some of his idea from Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote in his treatise on painting. He recommended that artists should look for inspiration in stains or marks on old walls. So even Leonardo,
Huh?
yeah. So even Da Vinci could not conceive. I don't think could conceive of abstract art. Okay, let's go on to Cozens' son in 1776. So this will show you more. Let's see.
Oh, okay. Now that is very, to me, that definitely looks like the painting of mid to late 18th century art that I know of.
Okay, so
It
this
is, for those of you who can see, it's an oval. It is in black and white. It's an illustration. It's a naturalistic illustration. It looks like a group of soldiers standing on a rock face on a mountain overlooking a horizon of trees and hills and clouds in black and white, almost like a cameo.
Okay, so this is a good illustration of what I was talking about earlier. How landscape painters of the time would sometimes create like a sort of abstract sky, but they didn't realize they were doing it. This is a preliminary drawing from a painting that was lost called "A Landscape with Hannibal in His March Over the Alps, Showing to His Army Fertile Plains of Italy." The original painting's lost. It was destroyed, but apparently it was in full color. It was huge. It was spectacular. It had a huge influence on the artists of the time. John Constable, who was another contemporary landscape painter, said of John Robert Cozens, he was the greatest genius that ever touched landscape. and
that's saying something, since Constable is considered actually the great naturalist of his time.
Well, I think a lot of these landscape painters, like when you start looking at these, they are practically going into abstraction. They don't, and it's almost like,
well, for those of you who cannot see this, I just have to point this out, Randall. So on the lower, is it the right hand side? Yes. So if it's a circle, on the lower right hand side, you can see the rock face, you can see Hannibal, you can see his army, and there's a lot of detail. And then even at the bottom left hand corner, you can see the rock formation in the tree. So 3/4 of this oval is very pale. The line work is very light. The color deviation, yes, it's slightly darker in the bottom half and slightly lighter. But if you were watching a movie or taking a photograph, you're normally used to the center of a painting or a photo being the center of focus. Here, it is not the case. Here, the focal point is on the lower right-hand half, and then 3/4, I would argue, of this oval seems slightly out of focus.
right, 3/4 is just like shapes and colors, and you see this in a lot of the landscape paintings of the time, which to me is fascinating because they're nearing abstraction, but it's like they don't have a concept for it. Okay, now let me go to the next slide. Let's see. This is a John Robert Cozens that sold in 2010 for 2.4 million pounds, and you can really
roughly $3 million.
And you can really see this is called Lake of Albano and Castel Gandolfo at sunset, and you can really see. I think this is a watercolor. You can really see how it's moving far away from representation. I mean, would you agree with me, Chris?
Okay, so again, for those of you who are just listening, this is in some ways a little more easier to describe since it is.
And this was painted in 1777, by the way.
This is a lake area. There is a strip of land that jets out and bisects the river from the ocean. You can see some trees, clouds, and water. It's entirely in black and white. It, again, looks so much like either watercolor or charcoal. So there isn't a lot of clear definition. There is some detail on the treetops, and but other than that, really, it's really more of a black and white painting of shading between white, light and dark. Not some chiaroscuro is being borrowed here, but for the most part, it's only the upper left-hand corner that has any lightness, and then most of this painting is just a contrast between various hues of black and white with amorphous shapes to indicate the trees, the clouds, and the waters, bodies of waters, lake and river.
Right. I mean, I don't want to go too far and say this is abstract painting, but because it's still completely recognizable as a landscape. I mean, nobody
Yes.
would look at this and say it's not a landscape. But you can see, but would you agree with me, Chris? You can see like sort of, you see what I'm talking about, right? When I'm saying that there's some degree of abstraction that they're
If
moving
we
toward.
were to cut this painting into quarters, upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left, and just cut it, then it would look very abstract. Put
Right.
together, you can form an image, but again, it's not a particularly clear image.
Okay, so in 1794, this painter, John Robert Cozens, he has a nervous breakdown. He's committed to the Bethlem Royal Hospital, right, which is the famous
Bedlam, haha.
Bedlam.
From a
Yeah.
rake in Bedlam, yes.
And get this, so there's a famous doctor slash art collector there called Thomas Monro,
Hmm.
and Monroe buys John Robert Cozens' entire remaining collection, and then Cozens dies 3 years later. Now get this, you're familiar with J.M.W. Turner, right? J.M.W.
Oh, absolutely. One of the great landscape artists of the 19th century. and
Right, so
18th century.
J.M.W. Turner is a friend of Monroe. So I'm thinking it's for sure that Monroe saw Monroe's collection. Turner saw Monroe's collection. Turner saw all of Cozens' paintings. This is, let's see, this is a JMW Turner right here. Okay, this is one of JMW Turner's greatest works. Now you can look at the sky. Do you see the sky, Chris? You see how
Now, for those of you, again, who are just listening, this one is in color. This one looks almost biblical in that we're out somewhere in the mountains. There are human beings on the lower left-hand corner. You can see in great detail their bodies. I think they have horses or mules. You see that they're in a cavern or some area with a lot of mountains and rocks. And there's a mountain on the upper right-hand corner. And then above at the upper parts of the painting is the sky, very dark foreboding clouds on the upper right-hand corner, very light grayish clouds on the upper left-hand corner, and then kind of also on the upper left-hand corner is a very bleak yellowish orange sun that's encased really by the gray, so that we would assume that the part of the very small quarter of the painting that does have some light is emanating from that sun.
Okay, I just want to add some context to this painting. So this was painted in 1812. This is called Snowstorm, Hannibal and his army crossing the Alps. This is probably inspired by the lost painting I was talking about earlier, a landscape with Hannibal and his march over the Alps, showing to his army fertile plains of Italy. And so I think maybe you can agree, Chris, that this is one of the more abstract skies that is a fairly abstract sky. That
I would say that it is quite detailed on the lower half of the painting, well, certainly in the lower left-hand painting. But once you get above to where the skies and the clouds are, like a lot of Turner's great works, you are really in an abstract sense of the world. Now, I will also say for any human being who has ever been outside on a rainy or cloudy day, it's still a very keen replication of the sensory experience of what that looks like. Without being, photographically exact, it is a visual approximation.
Okay, another thing I want to add is 2 years before this painting, Goethe, who I think it was a poet,
Goethe, yes.
Goethe. He printed a pamphlet book titled Theory of Colors, and this is one of the first this is one of the first attempts to artists would make these attempts many times over the years, but this is one of the first attempts to say that like this color is associated with this emotion, this shape is associated with that emotion. It's all like kind of like pseudoscientific, but that is a conceptual groundwork for abstraction, and almost all the later abstract painters would start with some kind of concept like that. But yeah, so 2 years before this painting, you have the theory of colors. I gotta go ahead a little bit. Let's see.
So do you think that Turner had read Goethe?
I think for sure, yeah. Okay, so now another thing that's happening at this time is an artist called Pierre-Henri de Valenciennes.
Yes.
He wrote a treatise called Reflections and Advice to a Student on Painting, particularly on Landscape. And this is the artist which may have invented plein air painting, which is the idea of just painting outside. And the reason this is important is because before 1800, because of the technology of painting, it was tough to go outside and paint. It was tough to paint from what you saw. You had to work in a studio. All the colors were like difficult. You had to mix all the colors yourself. You had to store them in, I think, pigs' bladders. It was a huge process, and you would have to put on, you'd use oil paints. Oil painting came into vogue like around 1700, I think, and you had to mix all your pigments with the oils, and then you would have to apply them, let them dry, apply them, let them dry. Sometimes it could take weeks to let them dry. So as the 1800s marches on, technology improves, people are able to go outside and paint what they saw and paint it very quickly. Okay, so before the 1800s, it was never possible to go outside and make a painting like in an hour of just what you saw. Now, you see this slide, Chris?
Yes. So those of you, again, I just want to show you what it is. So we are, again, outside. We are somewhere in a forest. In front of us, I never remember. Foreground is in front, background is behind, right?
Yes, foreground is the front.
So in the foreground, we have what looks like Romanesque or Pan. I think it's actually Pan. It could be a Romanesque. But we have characters in robes who are very detailed, figuratively, who are playing and interacting in the woods. There's actually 3 different compositions of people, left, center, and the background, and also in the right. The grass is incredibly detailed. The trees and the leaves are very detailed. And then when you get to the background center, off in the distance in the horizon point, we can see a mountain and just a sliver of what I think would be a lake and the skies. And there's a lot of intriguing hues and shades. Anyway.
Right. Well, what I wanted to show with this painting is, so this is the man that painted this is the guy Valenciennes. He invents outdoor painting, and you can see the colors of the sky are quite beautiful. They're quite striking, and
I want to just point this out too, that like real sky, there is almost a rainbow of colors. Meaning, if you go to the very top of the painting, it's a pretty deep blue. But if you start at the very beginning of the sky, which is slightly above the mountain range, it starts in an orange, an ochre. So just like any sunset, I was actually in Malibu yesterday, and I was there during the golden hour. So my eyes are very acute to the fact that you can see the entire color spectrum of sunset or sunrise reflected very subtly in the sky of this painting.
Right, and he's only getting this effect because he's going outside and painting it, I believe. So let me go and another reason I bring that up is because he because the orthodoxy would have you believe that the plein air painters, the Impressionists, they are going out, or they are moving towards abstraction. But I'm going to argue
paintings. I just wanted to let you know.
I know I did. I'm sorry. I'll get to it. So the orthodoxy would argue that they're moving towards abstraction. I'm trying to say they're not. So this is a Eugène Delacroix.
I'm such a big fan of Delacroix. I have one in my apartment.
So the reason I bring Delacroix up is because Delacroix is slightly before all the new developments in painting that Delacroix is about 100 years or maybe less before the abstract moment that we're going to get to, but he is highly influential. He's very popular. Everybody loves his work.
Again, for those of you who don't see what we're looking at, here we have a composition of maybe about 6 different people outside. It looks like possible slaves. Early, it could be almost biblical or Turkish or
I think
Middle Eastern.
This is 1824 massacre at Troyes.
Okay, so this is probably during that period of wars between Asia Minor and Europe.
I think this is a Turkish city, I think.
Right. It's the Ottoman Empire. It's Asia Minor. And here he clearly used life models. We have, I think, maybe 8 or 9 people. We have an Ottoman on a horse, a soldier. We have people who could be slaves or peasants who are in various states of distress. Barely covered, some of them, with incredibly detailed anatomy and ornamentation, even the costumes, the horses. But this is all in the foreground. In the background, it becomes, again, very remote and indiscernible. We can see what is probably other people in battle. Then as the land ends, we see the ocean, and we see a very cloudy sky.
Yeah, I want to say that you can see this in a lot of Delacroix's paintings. He's very much within the genre of historical painting that was very popular at the time. I mean, he is painting contemporary events, but he's doing it in the historical style that was very popular.
And
but
he was just a little bit about Delacroix, because that's someone I do know, is he had a studio, and he would put, have people come in, models. He actually liked to use prostitutes quite a bit.
Well, they all did, because and they were cheap and easy models.
Right. He would dress them. And here you have children, women, men, various ethnicities. But he was really, if you can't see this, I would say it almost looks photographic, even though there's no photography yet. This is so representational. This looks so real that it's hard to believe that it isn't.
Well, I want to say, the art schools in Europe at the time, they had gotten to a point where they wanted photorealism, and if you weren't going to paint photorealism, then they thought you weren't good. I mean, that was the whole point. I mean, and this is pre-cameras. You got to understand, the photography really only comes into its own like in the mid 1800s.
And even the anatomy of these figures in figurative art is pretty exact. Like this is actually what human bodies look like. Like you can tell. The proportionality and the texture and the hue is almost clinical.
Right, and I'm going to make the point later. Maybe I'll say it now. Even though photography is starting to exist, starting to come into its own, early photography is fairly primitive. The kinds of things you could get in a photograph, they were difficult, time consuming. So painters were still the best way to capture an image. I mean, for another
quick question, Randall, you're better on the tech. When was color photography popular? When did it become common?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think the Kodak camera, which was the first really easy way to capture photos, comes in 1888. Right. And even then, we're talking about black and white. Color
photography is like in the 30s and 40s, right?
I think it's even later than that. I'll have to look it up, Chris, but I think it's
Certainly
even
on
later.
a commercial level, not until the 50s.
Right, exactly.
And I would just say that, what year is this painting?
This painting is 1824.
It would be about almost 130, 140 years before you could really replicate this same imagery in photography.
Right, right. And see, a lot of people, and I thought it too, a lot of people will say, maybe the orthodox opinion will say that, the Impressionists, the modernist painters, they are trying to find ways to make themselves not obsolete due to photography. But photography can't really rival this kind of painting until like 100 years later.
Over 100 years, at least
Over 100
130.
years. Right.
Because it's not just color, but it's clarity and lighting and shading and lensing. I mean, you're a photographer. You're an excellent photographer. I'm an amateur. But if you were going to do this today and get life models and do all of the staging, right, it would require a lot of different elements that you'd have to harness to get the lighting, the focal points, all of this.
Okay, and another thing I want people to notice about this painting is Delacroix is a third of this painting is sky, and and Delacroix is borrowing the sort of abstract, shall we say, sky from landscape painters. He's creating a crazy sky, and he does this his whole career. And we're going to look at some more Delacroix, and I want to also point out that Renoir, Manet, and Degas, who are big Impressionist painters, right? They were all big fans of Delacroix. Okay, so
I do want to say one thing really quickly,
yes,
for what it's worth. I do think in that particular painting, the lack of focal point in the background causes the eye to focus on the foreground and the specificity of the figurative art.
Yes.
That's
yes,
all.
I mean, they want you to focus on the foreground, but I guess my point is you see that the painters, they're using the opportunity of the background to I don't know, go off the deep end, create something interesting artistically, aesthetically.
Yes.
But the thing is, conceptually, they're not even close to abstraction yet. They are almost subconsciously creating abstract art, but you need, I feel like what the painters need is they need a concept. They need the conceptual foundation, and that's the problem. It's like, and you'll see, like, as we go on, you'll see that they all get so close. It's like when you start looking at these paintings, you think there's going to be a smooth transition, but it's like you need a moment. You need like an Einstein practically to come out and lay the conceptual framework, and then after that it explodes. I mean, that's going to be my thesis. So this is a Delacroix right here. This is Horse Frightened by Lightning.
White horse on some sort of ground, could be sand, could be just dirt. In the background is water or mountains, very hard to say, and then a very gray cloud, and then in the upper left-hand corner, a white zigzag of lightning, and the horse's shape is hooves are up, bottom hooves are down, head is cocked off to the left, and clearly it's a startled horse.
Right, you can see now. Imagine if you took the horse away. Would this look like an abstract painting?
It could.
Okay, so that's my point. All right, let's go on. Here is
this is one of the most famous.
Right, this is a very famous Delacroix. This is Liberty Leading the People. It's probably the most famous one. It's the woman with a bare breast holding the French flag. There's like a kid that's probably maybe an inspiration for Les Miserables with the guns.
Three-quarters of the painting are just stacked with revolutionaries and casualties of this French Revolution.
Yeah, Delacroix loved to have some dead bodies in there. But
he loved to have some nudity.
Yes, that too. But you can see the sky is like it looks like it's smoky, it's cloudy, it's got different colors. It's
Randall, you're expecting me to take my eyes off of bare-breasted women and guns right, to focus on clouds? Okay, whatever, man.
Look at the clouds. All right, let's go to the next one. This is This is interesting because Delacroix made a variety of these paintings. Christ on the Sea of Galilee. It's like Jesus and his disciples on a little
boat.
tiny boat in the middle of the ocean,
surrounded by a very kind of greenish, murky water, and some white crest points for points for cresting wave.
You can see the figures aren't well detailed. They're moving towards expressionism. The ocean is quite not detailed. Yeah, so you can. That's just another good example of what I'm talking about. Let's go on. So this is
looks like from the perspective of a cave, looking out from into the water into what looks like a ship that's about to sink, a raft possibly, or a boat that's. I can't tell if it's sinking or if it's just a rowboat. And then there's mountains in the background, and further out on the horizon point is a cloudy blue sky.
Right. You can see though that it's not.
Oh, and then in the lower left-hand corner, it looks like there's some people.
Right.
Yes, there's 2 figures, 3 figures, just barely noticeable.
Yeah, you can see Delacroix is it's not very detailed. It's a little bit loose, you know. I mean, you could almost put this with the Impressionists like 50, 100 years later. Okay, I already saw that. Okay, now this is interesting, Chris. This is
one of those famous Japanese tidal wave paintings, right?
Right. This is called the Great Wave Kanagawa. And this was published in 1831. And the reason I bring this up is because there was this whole industry that started happening in Japan of Japanese woodblock prints. So the Japanese, they had a printing press, and they carved these wood blocks. They carved these pictures into wood blocks, and they used a lot of the new synthetic paints that had just been invented. So this painting was made with one of the first synthesized paints, Prussian blue, and it became a huge hit. This is probably the most famous Japanese woodblock print. And the reason I bring this up and show this is because all the Impressionists, all the European painters, they love these things. And a lot of them collected these things. And you can see that it's not abstract, right? But it is.
It's very detailed.
It's detailed.
I'm sorry. For those of you who are, I apologize. I fell off short on the job. So if you're just listening, it is a tidal wave. And the lower half of the painting and the upper half of the left-hand corner is literally a blue and white capped wave. And inside the waves, you can see are these 2 long boats that look like they're about to be engulfed by the wave. And then in the background, the upper right hand corner and about a quarter of this. I'm sorry. It's either a wave or a mountain in the background.
Yeah, I think that's Mount Fuji.
Mount Fuji, and then the rest of it is a sky where the first layer is gray, then it's like a peachish kind of light peach that kind of peters out into almost like a khaki or brown manila. And you are correct. While there is great detail in the wave, but it's almost to me like a cartoon, for lack of a better description, because it's only limited to like 3 colors: blue, white, and peach.
Right.
The peach is used for both the boats, and a faded hue of the peach is used for the sky once you get above the gray background of Mount Fuji.
Right, and yeah, so this is a different way of representing figures. I mean, it's figurative art, but it's like a different way of seeing, a different way.
Yeah, there are actual people on the boats, but you can barely see them.
And see, so the Impressionists were highly influenced. The modern painters, the modernist painters that are to come, are highly influenced by this because they see that there is a different way to represent figures. Like the European style of near photorealism is not the only way to do it, and they all love this. Now let's move ahead. Have you heard of
Orientalism? Was incredibly popular in the 19th century in America and in Europe. I can't even try to think of a contemporary thing of this, but this was what a hip person would own. This is what an enlightened hip, type of person would be into.
Yeah, in the Japanese industry, they were able to create numerous copies of these things.
Japan was opening its doors to trade with Europe, so all of this was new and exciting.
Right. Now, let's move ahead. Yeah, so this was 1831, but throughout this era, there's lots of these. So let's move ahead to 1839. Have you heard of a daguerreotype, Chris?
Yes, it's like a photo.
It's a photo. So what is it? Well, in 1839, there was this inventor in France, Daguerre, and a lot of people were trying to invent photography at this time. And, the photography goes back even 100 years before 1839, probably. But
I did not know that.
But in 1839, this guy Daguerre invented a process that was fairly easy, and the government of France decided to pay him a pension in exchange for publicizing his process to the world.
Oh, wow.
So that's why we have daguerreotypes. That's why we have photography, perhaps. And by 1853, there's an estimated 3 million daguerreotypes made per year in the United States alone. Are you serious? Yes.
That's wait, so when did it get introduced again, the daguerreotype?
The daguerreotype process was publicized by the government of France in 1839.
And 14 years later, they were making 3 million of them a year?
Yes, just in the United States.
Just in the U.S. That's you have to remember, folks, countries had populations of 20 million, 30 million. 3 million was a large number in this point in history. It's about 10% of the United States population in that period of history. Think about that. That'd be 1 out of 10 people. It would be the equivalent of how many people own smartphones made by Apple. You know what I'm saying?
It's the changes. I mean, as I did this research, Chris, I was really struck. I mean, the technological changes in the mid 1800s are just phenomenal. I'm going to even come up to another one. So you're talking about the first easy photographic process is introduced to the world in 1839. This is a little known technological invention. 1841, there's this guy by the name of John Goffe Rand. He's a portrait painter, but he's also an inventor, and he's an American. And he invents the tin paint tube. And before then, you had to store unused oil paint in like a pig's bladder. And you had to like prick a hole in the pig's bladder, and then to seal it, you needed to use some kind of puncture repair kit. But now, painters could just like open these tin tubes, with a screw top, and then screw it back on when they're done.
So what year is the paint tube?
The paint tube's invented in 1841.
So basically, you're telling me about this period in history, the first time ever, because even today, contemporary painters still use the same thing. The paint tube is what all painters use.
Right. Today, that's what they use, right? That's what all painters use.
So, I mean, for those of you who are not into painting or never painted before, think about how much prep time had to be put in for every color you wanted to use. And think about how inexact it would be using these primitive things. And then all of a sudden, you could pretty much get exact coloring in hues and shapes, and you could have as many as you could afford at your disposal. And, if you were a fairly well endowed, meaning a person gave you a lot of money, just to be very clear, or you had a lot of money, painter, you all of a sudden had a manifold increase in the amount of options you have. I mean, to give you an idea, in the contemporary world, David Hockney, in the 21st century, I believe, actually as recently as maybe 15 years ago, when did the iPad come out?
I don't know, about 10 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, about 2012. So Hockney was one of the earliest users of the iPad, and he had the painting program, and it allowed him to do things with color and shade and shape that heretofore had never been done. And, go and see his iPad works. It's brilliant, but it completely liberated and changed art. So really, nothing even comes as close to this invention until 2012.
Right. Now, let me say, here's some quotes about the paint tube. um, Now, there was this man, do you know Camille Pissarro?
Absolutely.
So Camille Pissarro is possibly the inventor of Impressionism, and he said, don't paint bit by bit. Paint everything at once by placing tones everywhere. And he's only able to say that. He's a guy that went out and outside and painted what he saw. He's only able to say that because of paint tubes, because you were never able to do that before. Renoir said, without colors and tubes, there would be no Cezanne, no Monet, no Pissarro, and no Impressionism. Okay, so in 1850, around 1850, that's when they invent the field easel, which is, have you seen, Chris, painters outside? They have like this nice little box, and they put all their stuff in the box, and it folds out, and it turns into an easel. You know what I'm talking about? That's a field easel. And when painters paint outside, that's what they're doing. They're using the field easel, and painters invented that around 1850 because now they have the paint tubes, and they could just go out and paint outside. Okay, so now we come up to 1863. This is a pivotal moment in the arts because you have Camille Pissarro, Monet, Guillaumin, Cezanne. These are all people that have banded together in Paris. They're going outside and painting. They're painting what they see. They're the Impressionists, which I don't think they've been identified as Impressionists yet, but they will be. And all their works are rejected in 1863 by the Salon, the Paris Salon. So the Salon is it's like an annual art show put on by the Paris Art Institute, and if you get your work shown in the Salon, you get work. And if you don't get your work shown in the Salon, you don't get work. So these artists who are great artists, they're pissed, and they go to the Emperor Napoleon III and they complain. Right, and the reason the Salon doesn't like their works is because their works aren't photorealistic. Okay, but here's the irony, Chris, and this is what I'll argue. Their works are photorealistic, but they're just not taking a lot of time to add a lot of detail. But they're trying to capture light. They're trying to capture colors. The way that painters never were before, because these guys are going outside and painting. But anyway, they complained to Napoleon III, and Napoleon found something called the Salon des Refuses, which is the exhibition of rejects, to display their works next to the normal salon. And some people go to jeer, but apparently this salon, it was a huge hit with a lot of people. And so the Salon des Refuses happened in 1874, 1875, and finally, it looks like in 1886 they finally stopped doing it. But that really kicked off the whole this whole thing about Impressionism, right? It kicked off this whole other way of making art that didn't have to be photorealistic. Although, I mean, see, I'm arguing that they are trying to capture what they're seeing in terms of light and color. Okay, so they're not taking and they're painting fast. They want to paint fast. You know what, Chris? I think they're almost trying to work like a camera. It's almost like, I guess the orthodoxy is that the camera comes in, and these painters especially Impressionists, are trying to do something different than the camera. But in my research, I almost feel like they are trying to mimic the camera. They're trying to go out there and paint fast and paint what they see like a camera.
Because they're losing the light, as we say in Hollywood.
Right.
They're going to burn through some day.
Right. Let's see. So we get to there's a lot of things going on, as time goes on, the late 1800s, they're discovering X-rays, radio waves, radioactivity. Okay, so here's a Monet.
Okay, so this is a great Monet. Again, listeners, this is a classic river scene, probably taken in London during the Industrial Revolution. It's as if you were on a boat, or you were looking out your window, and you can see on the river are some very small boats. Further off in the distance, looks like either boats that are moored or docks where boats are moored. And then further out, there is some clouds at the top of the horizon. And on the center right is an orange dot that should be the sun, which then reflects down into the water, which makes up the entire bottom half of the painting. There is nothing discernible in this painting, in that you cannot make any exact decisions about what you're looking at beyond the fact that it's an approximation of what it looks like when you're looking out onto water, sky, and boats.
Okay, so this painting was done in 1872 by Monet. It's called Impression Sunrise. And this is where the word impressionist comes from. So
that's my point. You can't really tell. It's an impression.
Right. But see, here's the thing. I guess the orthodoxy would say, well, the Impressionists, they are trying to get away from reality. But the truth is, Monet went outside and he looked at this and he probably had his little field easel and he's trying to paint the sunset, and he's trying to paint it as fast as he can because he doesn't want to lose the light, as they say in Hollywood. So he's trying to capture he's trying to capture the colors and the light as accurately as possible. The forms, he doesn't have the time to get the forms accurate, okay? Because if you were working the old way, the old master's way in the studio, you would take weeks to get all the forms right. You would make sketches and then you'd paint over the sketches. I mean, it would be a weeks-long, months-long process maybe. But people like Monet, they're just like painting quick. And you can see the colors are beautiful, right, Chris? I mean,
I just want to point this out. And again, it's only because I spent like an hour at sunset yesterday taking photos that, and I know this from just experience and I didn't even thought about it, but when you are doing something like this, you have to go at the brightest point of the painting quickly because it's the easiest thing to focus on, and the darkest point is the hardest. So I don't know his theory. He's not alive to tell me, but I would love to know, did he paint this from top to bottom or bottom to top? If he paints this from bottom to top, then he's always starting at the darkest point. If he's going from the opposite direction, he's always going from the lightest point. But anytime he spends where it's darker, he loses the lighter. And anytime he spends where it's lighter, it will become less discernible as he descends down the painting. Plus, as the sun sets in one direction, half of this painting is always going to be lighter, and another half of this painting is going to be darker. It's not easy.
Now I want you to look at the boat. The guy on the boat, do you see how there's like three of him? There's like going back in time. Now, why is that? That's because Monet is sitting there looking at this guy in the boat, and he's repainting this guy in the boat every time he moves. Do you see what I'm talking about, Chris?
So it's not really three boats then. It's
the same boat at different points in time.
Different periods of lighting.
That's right. So, I mean, that's my opinion. So, but see. That's exactly what these plein air impressionist painters are doing. They're going outside and just painting what they see really fast. So he paints the guy in the boat like 1 hour, and then the next hour he's moved, and the next hour he's moved, and he just keeps repainting the guy. Let's go to another picture. So this is another Monet. This is an example of a haystack picture. So Monet,
he did a large series of these in every kind of time period.
Right. So Monet, this is another example of what I'm talking about, and how the Impressionists, I think, this proves my point, I think, of how the Impressionists they're not moving towards abstraction. They're just going outside and painting what they see. Every year in the harvest of hay, in this particular part of, what is it, France he's living in, Monet?
Yes, I want to say Giverny, but I'm not entirely sure. No, it's Aix-en-Provence. I'll have to look it up later, but yes, he is in the French countryside. And we'll leave it at that.
Right. So the peasants are gathering up the hay and putting them in these stacks, and the stacks are kind of look like little houses. And Monet got the idea, well, I'm going to paint these little stacks of hay. during the harvest, and he went around painting tons of them, right? And these haystacks are highly influential. You know, all the artists from this period are like amazed at these haystacks and love them.
We
And
have one at the Getty Museum. It's still my favorite thing at the Getty. It takes place in wintertime, so it's covered in snow.
what do you like about the haystack? Tell me why it's your favorite thing.
Well, and this is something I really think that is great about Monet. And I don't want to take up too much of your time on Monet because I don't want to distract anyone. But Monet uses classical principles of perspective. So if you really look at any of his paintings, you can, but you have to go to a museum to do this. Don't look it up on the internet, folks. Go to a museum anyway. But if you walk from left to right or right to left, your perspective shifts in the same way that if you looked out a window. So depending on what angle you approach, the shifting foreground, background, and perspective of this painting will replicate almost a three-dimensional effect. And in relationship to what you're talking about today, while it's true, there really is, the focal point obviously is the haystack, but because the brush strokes, as you say, are so quick and lacking in specific detail, you're pretty free to let your eye wander away from the haystack to the trees, to the mountains, to the sky. Just like in real life, if you were actually in this painting, yeah, you'll notice whatever is in front of you, but your eye won't fixate. And in a lot of paintings up to this point, painting has a focal point where you fixate. Here it's much looser.
That's a very interesting comment, but what does that remind you of, Chris? Does that remind you of a photograph?
Absolutely.
You see, this is my point. It's like I started looking at these paintings and I thought, you know, these painters, they are not trying to move away from photography. They are mimicking photography. You know, and I think that you can look at other groups of painters like the Fauvists, and we'll get to I don't think we'll do Kandinsky in this episode, but you can see Kandinsky, they are taking little baby steps away from photography and away from representation, but I still think the abstract moment, it needs like a conceptual groundwork that nobody's able to even conceptualize. I mean, even with Goethe and his theory of colors in 1810, we're almost like 100 years away from that. Nobody can come up with abstraction, Chris. And these Impressionists, so these haystacks are coming out, we're in the late 1800s, or mid to late 1800s. No, we're in the late 1800s now.
Yeah, we're in the 1870s, 1880s.
So they still can't, they're still not even getting close to abstraction.
This is 1889. So we're really right at the end of the 19th century.
Right, they're not even getting close to abstraction. Now, the next painting, I guess it's a good time to end because this is my whole point. Is like, we're gonna get the next painting is gonna be like a pivotal transitional painting. It's gonna be Kandinsky's Blue Rider, and I don't want to talk about it right now, Chris, but I think.
But it's a good point to say that the post-impressionists, which come right after this, is in many ways, along with the impressionists and other movements of the last 15 years, you know, if you look at the 20th century and you look at artwork from the 1980s and the 1990s, even from the 1970s, if you look at the last quarter of art from the 20th century, it's very much in comparison to the last quarter of the 19th. All of the trends, all of the things that are breaking ground, all of the ideas that are reflecting technology in art, right? I mean, after all, we've done episodes about video, digital. You know, we've done this with the 20th century already. Weirdly enough, a lot of what we're covering for 19th, we did about a year ago in the 20th, which is that it is the crossroads of a new century that you can start seeing happening, and it's the death, I would argue, of art being there to be a photograph, to be proof, evidence of reality. And it's the beginning of art being a mixture of not just the sight, but also the feeling. And when we talk about Goethe, we really are dealing with someone who's highly spiritual, philosophical and very much someone who is a poet. So feeling is very important. So and you have to keep this within context, if you don't mind, which is this is the period of what they call the age of liberalism. Right after, it's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution. You have people now moving into cities, a rising middle class, people having university educations who never had it before. So there is now a multiplicities of how we interpret reality that is going on concurrently, so that it allows someone like Monet to, if this had come out 50 years earlier, you'd be like, this kind of looks like a mistake. But in this period of history, it doesn't look like a mistake. It anybody, and even in this period of history, could look at it and go, yeah, I know, not just on a visual level, but on a psychological level or an experiential level, what it is that Monet is trying to convey. And naturalism and nature, not naturalism, sorry, but the concept of nature in and of itself at this point in history is getting a lot of philosophical and religious examination. That in and of itself, we have to understand that this period in history, and Monet is commenting on this, cities are becoming dirty and grimy, and we're getting further and further away from what had been pure nature. So any pristine parts of nature at this point in history stands in contrast to what is going on.
Right. Yeah. The Industrial Revolution is marching on. It begins in England around 1750. By the mid 1800s, it's in full force everywhere. And
it's strange because these are the fortunes that are also funding this art.
Right. There's a burgeoning middle class. They are buying a lot of paintings at this time. And these artists, they're trying to get sold. I mean, these artists that we know of today, they're all big names. They're all selling tons of paintings at that time.
And just as far as people like in America, people like Frederick Law Olmsted, were building parks, central parks, so the wealthiest members of society are putting parks in cities. There are religious groups and philosophical groups that are starting to combine spirituality and nature. Walden comes out around this period. Whitman is writing around this period. Emerson, Thoreau. This is really symbolically emblematic of a higher truth, both from a bourgeois enlightened perspective and also from an intellectual and creative perspective. This is certainly this is not just nature for nature's sake, like Thomas Kinkade. I just want to throw that in, especially since we just saw him do a grimy, dirty London fog. So you really do understand this is a very conscious study.
Yeah, and I don't know, should I talk about abstraction for a minute here, Chris? How much time we have?
Oh, well, we don't really have more than a minute or two, but if you want to just set up where we're going next with
the next episode, I'm going to talk about the abstract moment and how it comes about and how difficult it is for our culture to come to it. It's not a transition. It's not a seamless transition like a lot of people have you believe. I don't think. But what it does though is once the abstract moment happens, the door opens for all sorts of other kinds of art.
Ooh, Randall, I am so excited to hear more. But unfortunately, folks, you're going to have to wait to the next episode. So until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And we will continue this conversation next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.